With the 2016 U.S. presidential election looming over our heads, we've heard a lot of back and forth on each of the candidates' prospective plans for their time in office. One of the hottest topics, as per usual, is the economy, which brings us to our guest tonight. Gilad Alper is a member of the Economic Advisory Board for the Israeli Minister of Finance, and he's here to talk about the future of the U.S. economy and the impact it could have on Israel. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So to begin, let's talk about how the U.S. economy affects Israel.
So I guess the first thing is that the U.S. economy is just a very large economy. That's kind of obvious. 25% of Israeli exports goes to the U.S. So we want the U.S. to prosper because that obviously increases demand for our products. And that's obviously important for the rest of the world. So on that very obvious level, we want the U.S. to prosper. The other way the U.S. impacts Israel and other countries is a little bit more subtle. And that is that U.S. economic policies, to some degree or to a large degree, legitimize and encourage the same policies to be implemented in other places. So for example, in 2008, where the US decided to go on a path of monetary expansion and increase also the budget deficit, that kind of gave the legitimacy to other countries to pursue the same policies. So whether Trump wins or Clinton wins, the policies they're going to implement is probably going to make an impact in terms of policies in other countries as well, including Israel.
Now, economically, what does Israel need the most from the United States?
The answer for that is very, very easy. We just need the U.S. to prosper. As I said, 25% of our exports goes to the U.S. Second only, I think, to Europe. Other parts of the world, also big trading partners of the U.S. need the exact same thing. So we just need that whatever policies are going to be enacted in the U.S. over the next 4 years, that these policies will be successful. It's very, very simple.
Yeah, it is very simple. Now, what's not so simple is what the U.S. economy itself needs to become stronger, right?
Exactly. Look, I mean, if you look at the last 4 years, 8 years, and even more than that, the problems the U.S. economy seems to be struggling with is not very different from what you see in other Western countries, including Israel, which is, and this is of course all in my opinion, taxes are becoming too high, too burdensome, especially for businesses and especially for small businesses. Regulation is becoming too onerous, especially also on small businesses. And that's probably what you want the U.S. to do, which is to deregulate and to cut taxes, especially on businesses.
Now, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have very different policies when it comes to the economy. Can you kind of outline the major differences?
So these differences are major, exactly like you say, not only in the policies themselves, but also in the scope. Clinton, I think her policies are very, not very, but they're kind of modest. She's basically the candidate of status quo. She's by and large continuing the policies of Obama and to a certain extent also the policies of Bush before him, because Bush and Obama were not as different as some people think. So she basically wants to continue that. So she's probably going to put on some more regulation. She's probably going to increase taxes on the rich per her explicit plans. She's also talking about imposing an exit tax on U.S. corporations that want to relocate overseas or outside the U.S. So again, basically a continuation of what we have right now. Trump is coming from a completely different perspective because his big message is that the U.S. is doing very badly. So he wants a very sharp departure of what has been going on for the last 4, 8, 12 years. So his policies are a lot more dramatic. So he wants to cut corporate tax from 35% to 15%, which is dramatic. He wants to deregulate. He wants to make sure that many of the regulations that are not important for public safety are abolished. So he's a lot more dramatic in his policies.
Now, can you speculate as to which of these policies is better for Israel and also for the world as a whole?
It's assuming that these stated policies are the one that are actually going to be enacted, assuming that Congress is going to go along with those policies, which is a big question, assuming all of these, Trump's plans, or at least a big element of his plans, seem to be more in sync with what the US needs and what Israel needs, in my opinion. Because, as I said, the issue of too many regulations and taxes that are too high and that discourage investments are the big problem of the Western world. So if Trump plans of cutting taxes and cutting regulations are the one that are actually going to be, the ongoing policies for the next 4 or 8 years, that's good news.
Is this enough of an incentive for Israeli Americans to want to vote for Trump, in your opinion?
Look, I'll speak purely from the point of view of economics. I don't want to go into the other considerations of either geopolitics or social policies or any of the other stuff that is associated with this somewhat odd campaign. Purely from an economic perspective, Trump, I think, is better on the whole. Now, he's far from perfect. His trade policy is not very smart. Slapping tariffs on imports from China is going to increase prices on Chinese goods, and that doesn't make sense. Now, the irony is that some of his other policies, namely cutting regulations and taxes, are probably going to render those tariffs unnecessary because U.S. companies are going to increase investments and production in the U.S. if he actually cuts regulations and taxes. But still, his trading policy is somewhat not in sync with some of his other policies.
So, Israel is one of the hubs of startup. It's called the Startup Nation. Is there a risk of Israeli companies relocating to the United States if corporate taxes are cut?
Well, to some extent, yes. I mean, Israel is known as an R&D center, R&D development center for companies all around the world, especially the U.S., and I'm not sure if cutting corporate taxes in the U.S. is going to damage that. However, overall, if the U.S. cuts corporate taxes, then companies, not only in high-tech, but in many other sectors, are going to possibly move to the U.S. or open offices in the U.S., not only from Israel, but from other countries. And that's exactly what I alluded to before, which is whatever the U.S. does in terms of economic policies kind of filters through to other countries as well. So if the U.S. cuts corporate tax from 35% to 15%, which again is a huge move, other countries, including Israel, will probably have to follow suit and cut corporate taxes as well, which is fantastic for Israel and for anyone else who pursues that policy, in my view.
Now, when it comes to the Startup Nation and America's support of Israel's, blooming startups and R&D centers, are we going to be seeing that same support coming from both administrations, or do you think it will vary? I
think the support to Israel, in its capacity as a hub for new technologies and startups, is completely and utterly the outcome of Israel's ability to develop those technologies. It's completely independent of whoever becomes the next president in the U.S. So I don't think that's going to have a big impact.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I think you gave us some very important insight into what we should hope to happen with the future of the U.S. economy and obviously its impact on Israel.
Thank you.